Respected elders, our own Baprang, and all my fellow young people from diverse Indigenous peoples communities, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from Shillong in Northeast India. I am Alithia. I'm from Nespas, and I'm honored as a young Indigenous woman to have been entrusted to manage this important global webinar of TIP. And I now call upon Baprang, the coordinator of TIP, and whom we all know, to give us a 4-minute introduction of the objectives of this webinar.
Thank you, dear friends, for joining us in this webinar, and we are looking forward very much to the discussions and the presentations. When the 2021 UN Food System Summit was called for more nature-positive food systems, we Indigenous peoples stake a claim that Indigenous peoples' food systems are nature-positive and therefore we need to be acknowledged and supported. We were asked, however, to produce evidence in support of our claim. TIP, as an international Indigenous peoples organization, decided to undertake its own assessment of Indigenous peoples' food systems to produce more evidence of their nature-positive characteristics. Rockefeller Foundation and other funders came forward to give us the needed funding support. FAO's agroecology unit provided us with the use of their tool for agroecology performance evaluation methodology. They train our young people in its use. They supported our Indigenous peoples team members in the statistical analysis requirements of the TAPE methodology. This was a wonderful and practical experience of an intercultural co-creation of knowledge. The first thing we did as part of the study was to review the TAPE detailed questionnaire from an Indigenous people's perspective. We found that it was essentially based on the parameters of conventional agriculture, and it did not take into account the diversity and seasonality of food system found in Indigenous peoples' lands and territories. With the support of FAO, we reformulated the survey design that respected the 10 principles of agroecology, but that also incorporated the distinctiveness of the food systems of Indigenous peoples. This webinar is intended to help our young participants to understand and appreciate the importance of our traditional knowledge and why it makes sense for us to promote such an intercultural co-creation of knowledge. Dr. Francisco Rosado May will lead us with his presentation, and five eminent professionals with deep experiences with Indigenous peoples will share their reflections. We are living in a time of profound and cross-cutting crisis, a time when we are seeing the collapse of the natural world and the rise of public frustration that are now being cleverly directed against the many who have suffered centuries of exploitation and dispossession. If, as Indigenous peoples, we are to be game changers towards a more nature-based and peaceful world, if we are to spread joy through our values of caring and sharing, then we too have to strategically evolve our learning and knowing approaches. We strongly believe we can do so by spending time and money building a cadre of young people who appreciate the key nature-based development notions of contemporary knowledge and at the same time who are grounded in their local and diverse traditional knowledge and value systems. Our young people will also need to develop a deeper understanding of how, in an unequal world, we, the historically marginalized communities, can still use these two knowledge systems to build the future that we want. Francisco will lead us to show on how an intercultural approach to knowledge can help our young people to build local templates of solutions to shape a future where greed, exploitation, and oppression will have no place. I believe we can do this through a deep intercultural knowledge. Thank you very much, Alicia, the moderator of this webinar.
Thank you, Baprang, for your concise but very clear presentation of the objectives of this webinar. Baprang has mentioned about the TAPE study, which is helping TIP and its partners to now prepare an outscaling framework to reinvigorate Indigenous peoples' food systems. Ms. Gracia Dakar, a young Indigenous professional, coordinated the study, and she is here with us as well. She will now, through a 3-minute video recording, present the key findings of the TAPE study. Please kindly play the video.
Warm greetings from Meghalaya, Northeast India. On behalf of TIP and NESFAS, I thank the organizers for this opportunity to share reflections from Indigenous peoples' perspective. For my people, Mayram O, Mother Earth is sacred. She's not a resource to be exploited, but a living being to be cared for. Our food, knowledge, and well-being are rooted in this relationship of respect and reciprocity. Indigenous peoples' food systems are more than just agriculture. They represent mosaics of landscape, of regenerative systems, cultivated, semi-domesticated, and natural systems, most of which are rain-fed. They offer valuable insights and templates for transitioning towards more sustainable food systems. Yet, they have long been marginalized in both policies and research, especially rain-fed agriculture and traditional practices key to climate resilience. Our assessment using FAO STAPE methodology in Kenya, Mexico, Northern Thailand, and Northeast India demonstrated strong agroecological performance across IP landscapes. It revealed human and social values are foundational, where food is produced not just for sustenance or income, but to nurture ecosystems guided by the values of caring, sharing, and community well-being. In many Indigenous communities, gender roles are based on mutual responsibility. Women are central, nurturing and carrying deep ecological knowledge from seed saving to foraging and managing agrobiodiversity across landscapes. When these roles are overlooked, we risk losing the diversity they sustain. Indigenous peoples' food system relate to individuals and communities, unlike modern systems that are increasingly individualistic. Recognizing this dual role is vital for climate resilience and reconnecting people with nature. Mainstream science has largely focused on measurable outcomes, overlooking the ethical and relational values of Indigenous systems. We must acknowledge Indigenous peoples' rights to their knowledge and resources, including ownership, recognition, and fair benefit sharing for their contribution to global well-being. We need to safeguard these from extractive models that prioritize profit over people and ecosystems. This calls for intercultural co-creation of knowledge that respects Indigenous ownership, value lived experience, and integrates appropriate science. Such respectful collaboration sustains the relevance of Indigenous food systems and offers pathways to more equitable, resilient, and nature-based futures for all. Thank you.
Dr. Francisco Rosado May, the founding president of the Intercultural Maya University of Quintana Roo, Mexico, and a key advisor of TIP, and all of us involved with TIP, will now give us a presentation of the key concepts of how local and contemporary knowledge can work together to stimulate Indigenous peoples' food systems. Dr. Francisco, you have 45 minutes. And I kindly request you to finish your presentation within 45 minutes. The floor is yours, Dr. Francisco. Thank you.
Okay, let me start with acknowledgement. What I'm going to present is not my own work. It has input from many, many people, but I like to thank especially two of them today, Frank Roy and Dr. Francisco Espinosa Garcia. I also would like to say special thank you to Michelle, Rupert, Edmond, Marilyn, and Tades for their time and comments in this webinar. Okay, now I'm going to present some context first, and then I'm going to present a conceptual framework for my talk, and I'm going to present a case study to back up the concepts that I will talk about. Okay, this is the situation that we are at now. It hasn't changed much, and it's just like Frank mentioned. We are in trouble. We need changes in our food system, and to do that, there are calls, and the calls use the term transformation to transform the broken food system. And here are only a few examples of those many calls that are around from international organizations, from local organizations, from the academia, from the civil society organizations, and so on. So there is an international call to transform broken food systems. And usually, to most people, when we're talking about transforming food systems, what is on our mind is the large scale, the agro-industrial food system, but agribusiness-like system. And to change, to transform those systems, calls also have been made for co-creating knowledge. And that means that the system, global system, is acknowledging that to attend, to face the challenges of the food system, science is not enough. That we need the local knowledge, we need the expertise, we need the experience that other cultures and ways of knowing, not only science, can provide to meet the challenges of transforming the broken food system. And we use the term co-creation of knowledge. Co-creation of knowledge has implicitly, not explicitly, the interaction of different ways of knowing, but co-creation of knowledge is also happening when two people or more from the same scientific area work together and create a paper for it. That's also co-creation, but that's not the co-creation that we mean when we started talking about co-creation. But we don't only have agri-food systems, commercial food systems, large-scale food systems in the world. We also have small-scale agriculture. We also have what we know as traditional agriculture. And we also have indigenous food systems. Here are three examples: the bone system in Northeast India, the rotational farming in the northern part of Thailand, and of course, our milpa in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. But many of these systems have been recognized through the globally important agricultural heritage systems by the FAO, but many others are not. The fact that a few of them have been acknowledged by FAO in this GAHS program, it's telling us that there is a wealth of information, there is a wealth of experience still present in our planet. And it only makes sense, for instance, in our case in Mexico, we have, in the case of the Yucatec Maya people, I am part of them, we have over 4,000 years of accumulated experience, of knowledge created through those years, which is a lot when we compare it to the 325 years of applying the scientific method. And it's a lot greater than when we talk about the 185 years of experience using fertilizers as a result of scientific research, or 169 years of experience as a result of Mendel's work in plant genetics, or 80 years only of experience on the Green Revolution, or only 50 years of experience of agroecology. So we do have a lot to offer, not only by the Yucatec Maya people, but by indigenous peoples in the world. And we are still here. And when we talk about indigenous food systems, we also have to acknowledge that not 100% of traditional agriculture or systems that have elements of what we can consider traditional agriculture are fine. No, many of those systems are also broken. And here are some data from the 2020 when we had the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And when we did this work, we expected that after the pandemic, many of the people who were saying, now it is the time when we acknowledge that our traditional knowledge is the best solution to attend this issue with COVID. But 3 years later, not only that didn't happen, but also the percentage, at least within the Yucatec Maya people, of farmers using green revolution elements is increasing. So we have also a situation, a difficult situation in indigenous food systems. I am really sure that this is not only the case of the Yucatec Maya people, but also in many other parts of the world. So we have a context in which both unsustainable, conventional, and indigenous food systems need to change. I am on purpose using the term changing and not transformation, as it has been used mostly in the literature and many international talks. I'm using the word change. There are still many examples of sustainable indigenous systems sustained by the wealth of indigenous knowledge. And co-creation, use the concept of co-creation of knowledge, opens a space for collaboration between science and indigenous knowledge to change food systems. So this is the context that I am going to use for this presentation. And that brings several questions. What is it needed for a significant and full participation between indigenous knowledge, indigenous peoples in co-creation processes? Do we know well enough our indigenous food systems so that we could have full participation in co-creation processes? And how to develop a full indigenous participation process in co-creation of knowledge? All right, to attend those questions, I am using this model. We know very well how science works, and we can identify 4 pillars that make the whole scientific method, scientific knowledge to work. And these 4 pillars are concepts, methods, analysis, and synthesis. That is the realm of science from which we have elaborated, we human people have elaborated laws, theories, and hypotheses. Do we have something like that in the realm of indigenous peoples and local communities' ways of knowing? And we probably do, because otherwise we would have a hard time explaining all these centuries of successfully creating food to feed their people. So we have, I use the premise that indigenous peoples and local communities do have concepts, methodologies, analysis, and synthesis. We just haven't figured it out completely, which explains the solid knowledge. The challenge is to find them and understand how they work so that intercultural bridges can be built for co-creation of knowledge. And this is the model that envisions how intercultural co-creation of knowledge should happen. When we find bridges linking different ways, but concepts anyway, different ways, but methods anyway, different ways to do analysis and different ways to do synthesis, then we should be on a much more solid condition to fully participate in processes of co-creation of knowledge. Problem is that the educational system doesn't always favor or understand indigenous ways of knowing. Now, let me bring the case study, starting with an idea to develop a concept and a working definition, which they are, in a way, the result of a synthesis. And also to understand how the Yucatec Maya food system works. Okay, this is the part I am living in this planet. This is the Yucatan Peninsula in the American continent. And our people have developed basically the following ways of producing food and other goods for the families and for the community. We start with the forest, the jungle. There is some clearing and burning. And in the beginning, in this same place, we build a house. We start a milpa, which is a picture that I presented, and this in the GIHS program, FAO program. And this first year, we also start a home garden. The home garden grows. We incorporate animals. We incorporate other ways of producing food close to the house. We call it canche. And we keep going with the milpa, but on a different place because the original place has already been taken by the home garden. We also have beekeeping, and we also still keep using things from the forest. So once the different components of the food system, which we call subsystems, home garden is a subsystem, a canche is a subsystem of the food system, the beekeeping is also a subsystem of the whole food system. Now there is time to start looking for another place to keep doing the milpa, clearing, burning, first year, second year, third year, and then we start finding for a new cycle, new forest area, and the system goes on, at least for the subsystem of the milpa, goes on for 20, 30 years before returning to the original place, to the first area that was cleared in the forest for the first milpa. So this is how we build our food system. But if we focus on the soil aspect of our food system, we have the following results. These are pictures that show how is our landscape. And I'm using, in this case, the milpa to illustrate that point. Now, we have data, different conditions. Initial situation, slash and burn field, fire-free field. Organic matter, 679, slash and burn 516, fire-free 725. It looks like the fire is affecting the organic matter content. One problem with this paper is that it only is presenting data from only 1 year of results. Now, if we take information in a rain-fed agriculture and using time intervals of using the land, this is what we find in soil organic matter. 5.6, and when we cultivate the same area from 1 to 5 years, the organic matter in the soil goes down to 4.8, and the longer we cultivate the same area, 26 to 30 years, the lower the organic soil, the organic matter is in the soil. All right. But it turns out that the content of the organic matter depends on the type of soil. And this is the list of the type of soil in Mayan terms. And this is what different authors have reported as a minimum and maximum value of organic matter in this type of soil. We have values all the way up to 30.7% of organic matter in soil under agriculture, and we have as low as 0.21% of organic matter. So this is very different values. We can compare also rainy seasons with dry seasons, and we find from years of cultivation 30 to 35, 9.07% of organic carbon content, and versus 6.5 in dry season. So we have a high diversity of results in high diversity types of soil. And when we look at the official system for classifying how good the content of organic matter in our soil is, based on an official document, we can consider our soils as with high content of organic matter when we have values from 3.6 to 6.600% of organic matter. And a lot of the information that I presented previously are in that range. So here we have an instrument of public policy telling us that as long as we have 3.6% of organic matter in our soils, we're good. But it turns out that we used to have a higher percentage of organic matter in our soil. But there is another situation here also that is hidden, is invisible. How come after centuries of using soil, we still are not below the consideration of high content of organic matter? There is something in our practices that on the one hand is explaining the loss of organic carbon in the soil, but it's also there is something in our practices in agriculture that explain why is it that we haven't fallen lower than what is considered a high percentage of organic soil. So that means that the Yucatec people Maya know a lot of the soil systems. And we also have our own classification of the system. And there are enough research that tell us when we talk about a puck loom in a soil by a Yucatec Maya, we are referring to a histosol. When we talk about caca bloom, we are talking about an anthrosol, and so on. So here we have concepts, we have knowledge that can be bridged and can be matched with the non-local knowledge, with the scientific knowledge. So the Yucatec Maya people, and I'm sure in many other parts of the world, have highly sophisticated knowledge of their resource. And the list goes on and on. Okay. And we also have to have that type of classification with details, because this is how our soils look like. In just a few meters, we have different soil conditions. We have hilly soils, not so high, no hills, not so high. But on top of the soil, we have black soil. In the bottom part of the soil, we have red soil. And starting climbing another hill, we have gray soil. And when we do a horizontal soil type of distribution, we also have in the same area, this is a hectare, of different types of soil. So we just have to have a very good knowledge on the soil and soil management. It is so good that some people have developed apps to actually have using the Android phone to know exactly what is the name used by the Mayas on this of the soil that we're working on. We wouldn't have had this app if we didn't have enough quality in the information from the Yucatec Maya. So remember that I mentioned that in the Yucatec Maya people, the percentage of people still keeping the traditional knowledge of their farming is decreasing quite rapidly. Now, 25% of our farmers do have the knowledge, do keep a lot of the traditional knowledge. And the number of people incorporating conventional elements of farming is increasing. So we have problem here. And not only that, but public policy is not helping. We have been in the third year of a federal government program that is giving away for free fertilizers, tons of it, with the idea of meeting the expectations that are set by the concept of food security. So, of course, we have public policy also not helping the preservation of traditional knowledge, and we have an educational system that is not acknowledging, much less understanding and investigating traditional knowledge. And I'm not only saying this because of the observations are also researching this situation. Now, how can we find an entry point to connect knowledge, soil, and food systems? All right, by diversity is one way to do it. And this is how our traditional farming has incorporated diversity. Home garden has many components, and it's been recorded from 50 to 387 species in the home garden. The canche from 1 to 4 species, the milpa, which name in Yucatec Maya is ichcol, up to 50 species growing in the milpa, forests using over 900 species, animals from 3 to 5, insects from 1 to 5. So this, just thinking about how to design and manage a food system that incorporates these many subcomponents and species, and not only that, but also diversity, intra-specific diversity, meaning different varieties with each of the crops that are used in each of the subsystems. It just gives headache. This is way too much. This is a lot for the training that we have in science, which focuses us on one and specific aspect of the complexity of our food system. But there is another component. The farmers, the Yucatec Maya farmers, not only have to know and know very well their own food system, but also how the food system is connected to the surrounding area. In the case of Mexico, the concept of ejido plays a very critical role and is the territorial base of decisions that each ejido makes for determining what to do, and this also the base for the federal federal government programs regarding food security. So again, it's individual food system made up by different subsystems and community vision of what they do regarding food production. So indigenous peoples' food systems incorporate elements of nutrition, health, nature, livelihood, and articulate individual farming and community well-being. That's the first conclusion I can come up with after doing the analysis that I just presented. But to understand our food systems, I can use a concept from ecology called dynamic equilibrium. We can explain the sustainability of each of the components of the food system. If we look at it as something that behaves through time in a range of values. There are ups and downs, but the system keeps going through the years, through centuries. And this can only be achieved when there is a design and management of the system that allows a dynamic equilibrium. The system doesn't break easily because it has many other reinforcements. This figure represents that when we have the milpa system, for instance, going this way, this is the milpa. We have the home garden subsystem going another way and meeting a need when the one system is down. And not only that, but we have beekeeping, and only that, but we have forest, and only that, but we have canche. This is what a farmer, a Yucatec Maya farmer, has to handle in her mind to have the whole food system working together. So this is especially complex. And the system reaches a point of dynamic equilibrium when it has incorporated many of the elements. And when something happens, when there is an introduction of other ways of producing food, like fertilizers or pesticides or herbicides, or when we lose significant parts, critical parts of the traditional knowledge, the system declines. And when the system declines, then we have broken food systems. And we have broken food systems. Not only we have broken food systems, but we are also contributing to the problems of loss of biodiversity, climate change, and so on. The first slide I started this conversation. So overall, this model attempts to represent what's going on is that there is a process of learning, creation, and transmission of knowledge that is reinforced in an innovation and sharing knowledge process that explains the dynamic equilibrium of the system. When we lose this, we lose the via our own loss of knowledge or public policy affecting our systems, then the whole system collapses. We know that also because we've done some work trying to understand using other scientifically accepted methods. And it was explained by Grecia in the beginning, kind of take the instrument that FAO has proposed to evaluate the agroecological performance of food systems. The 10 elements of TAPE are presented using this matrix. This is the matrix that FAO came up with after doing lots of studies, understanding how these 10 elements are present in food systems. But you see that there are two elements that are outside of the matrix. On the left side is the economical part of the element, which means that the system is basically resting on economical value. And the other end is responsible governance. Okay, this distribution of the 10 elements do help to understand processes in food systems from an agroecological point of view. But the question is, can we use this distribution, this organization of the elements in indigenous food systems? The answer is not quite. Using the same 10 elements, we find that there is a different logic in the thinking of indigenous peoples, at least from the Yucatec Maya point of view. The organization of the 10 elements follows the same thinking that is behind the construction of a house. Each element favors or sustains or is the foundation for other elements. And this is how the organization of the 10 elements look like after doing the analysis of our own system. And it's not a matrix. And it doesn't rest on economical values, but on human and social values. The whole system depends on this. The whole indigenous system, food system, depends on the human and social values. And yes, there is governance at the end of it that makes sure that the whole elements are in place, but there is also this function of circularity that is present in a lot of the indigenous things. So just by identifying this way on how to organize using the 10 elements of agroecology, which is the product of scientific knowledge, now transformed into the indigenous ways of knowing, we can start talking and we can start doing full contribution, full process, full participation in co-creation of knowledge. Okay? And this is the difference. Very interesting difference. I'm not saying that one challenges the other. I'm saying that there are different ways of using the same elements. There are different ways of understanding the composition of food systems, conventional and indigenous, and therefore we can start building bridges to amend broken food systems. And based on what I described about the Yucatec Maya food system, we can also make a comparison, compare the definition of non-indigenous definition of food system by Von Braun et al. It's a classic paper. And this definition is commercially value driven. And it's also portrays the system beyond the area on which food is produced. The Yucatec Maya thinking of food system has some of the same elements, but has other elements. In most cases, the understanding of food system doesn't go beyond the territory. In most cases, there is no significant intervention of industrial processing. Food can be originated from agriculture and other sources of food. And there is a strong biodiversity component, which are not explicitly present in the definition given by Von Braun, for instance. So that brings us to this process of concepts driving processes and finding differences in how they are understood. Concepts represent ideas and explain processes. They drive decisions and actions that influence the outcome of processes. It is then critical to identify them and clearly understand them. Sorry for the typos in this and many of my slides. I'm just seeing them. So, examples. A definition of non-indigenous definition of food system implies that the system goes beyond the scope of a territory and is driven by economics. Indigenous food system within the scope of a territory is individual and is community and is driven by social values. One of the non-indigenous concepts that drives a lot of the decisions and actions is competition. Competition doesn't exist in the Yucatec Maya thinking, and I bet it doesn't exist in many other indigenous peoples in the world as well. We think more in terms of cooperation and coexistence. Value chain is another non-indigenous concept that drives a lot of decisions and actions, and it's a very common concept in economics. We don't have chain, we have web. And thus, we don't have a supply chain and food security, such as giving away fertilizer so that we can produce enough corn to meet the demands of the people without having backing up programs of research on how even to use efficiently the fertilizer that is given away. Not even getting to the point in which how can I substitute the fertilizer and how can I redesign the food system so I can be more sustainable. And in the thinking speaking of indigenous Yucatec Maya people, all of them, all three of them are connected and is expressed in the concept is expressed following the same phrase by a farmer. When I plan for the next year farming, I would like to make sure food security, look the colors, that I can produce enough food, look at the colors, food sufficiency, without harming the environment or having to depend on government assistance. Food sovereignty. So in our thinking, those three elements are connected. So when programs come from one of them separated from the others, it's just it's not making click in our thinking. So understanding indigenous food systems and fully participating in processes for intercultural co-creation of knowledge demands new ways of training new generation. We don't have that element as well in many parts of the world. And look at this graph. On this axis, we have changes in the way we think of science using unidisciplinary all the way to transdisciplinary thinking, which is the area in which we are at now. And the degree of participation by local farmers or indigenous farmers, the higher the participation, the better. And this is the path to sustainability. Co-creation, effective co-creation, intercultural co-creation knowledge demand epistemology that considers a transdisciplinary approach to intervention and interactions of different cultural ways of learning, creating, innovating, and transmitting knowledge. Not easy, but we have to get into that realm of thinking and training new generation. That's a great challenge. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to your comment. Back to you, Alicia.
So we have heard the concepts and suggestions of Dr. Francisco. And as young people, we are very eager to know how we can operationalize these concepts. Today, we are very lucky to have with us a team of experts who can guide us in our understanding. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to have a full follow-up comments from our senior elders, but we hope that this webinar will introduce us to some of them and their ideas so that we can subsequently follow up with them with help from TIP. So each elder is requested to limit his or her comment to 5 minutes only. And with that, I now call upon Dr. Michelle Pimber, a world-renowned scientist from the International Institute of Environmental Development and the former director of the Center of Agroecology, Water and Resilience of Coventry University, UK. Dr. Michelle Pimber, you have 5 minutes now.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Francisco, for your excellent presentation. You've covered an awful lot of ground. It's very rich. I'm only going to echo 5 points you touched upon. I have 5 minutes. I don't know if I'll succeed, but please don't call me an expert. Whatever I've learned is with many people, and I hate the word expert, frankly. So Francisco mentioned the need to transform a broken food system. And he's right, the word transformation is being widely used right now. And we always have to ask ourselves, transformation of the food system for whom, how, and with what consequences? Is transformation for what? Is it transformation to perpetuate colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy, or is it a much more emancipatory social project? Is it aligned with the cultural values, self-determined by indigenous communities or not? These are critical questions that have to be asked each time we use the word transformation in different fora. The second point is about the co-creation of knowledge. Very important, but it's key to qualify that and say that that co-creation of knowledge needs to be based on cognitive justice, and cognitive justice recognizes the constitutional right of different knowledge systems to exist in a pluriverse. It recognizes the full value of indigenous knowledge systems and the value of scientific knowledge systems. They have a constitutional right to exist. And very importantly, when we talk about indigenous knowledge, that knowledge cannot be abstracted from the wider context in which knowledge is in relation with the local territory, with local culture, with spirituality and customary institutions. There's a much more holistic understanding of what knowledge is. And sustaining indigenous knowledge also implies sustaining the territories and the ecologies that allow that knowledge to flourish. Again, this is a very important marker to put down in conversations with scientists and policymakers. Now, intercultural dialogue for this interaction, and I think it's good to remind ourselves that when well practiced, it is a very open and respectful exchange of views between people and communities. It's based on mutual understanding. It tries to bridge differences, and it actually celebrates our shared humanity. And that's important. And this is important to stress at a time of divisiveness and polarization in society. And the final point, because I'm going to run out of time, is that it's helpful to think about the deployment of intercultural dialogue in the context of two pathways aimed at strengthening indigenous peoples' agriculture and land use. The first approach tries to expand grassroots innovation and self-managed research by and for indigenous peoples. So this is all about strengthening the horizontal networks of indigenous peoples, men and women, elders and young, and doing this via intercultural dialogues around food, farming and land use, as well as cultural affirmation of the values and cosmovisions that underpin those systems. The second approach, and they're not opposed, they can be complementary, is intercultural dialogues deployed in the context of a process that seeks to democratize and decolonize public research. And this essentially means putting indigenous people as human beings, as sentient individuals with their knowledge, their cultures, their ways of being, putting indigenous peoples at the heart of decision making in research. Not the scientists, not the policymakers, indigenous peoples, their knowledge, their priorities, their criteria first. Second, it does mean embracing transdisciplinarity, as Francisco said, but a methodological pluralism and much more holistic ways of knowing. Now, that's difficult for formal science. Formal scientists like myself, we're not trained to do that. So there's a very, very important need for organizational transformation in science bureaucracies, in research institutions, and a whole process of professional reversals that encourage, teach scientists to be more gender sensitive, culturally sensitive, hand over the stick, participate in shared analysis, engage in mutual dialogue and diálogos de saberes. This is a tall order because it means changing attitudes, behaviors, and practices of scientists in institutions, and right from primary school to secondary school and universities. The fourth area, very importantly as part of this process, is protecting public research from privatization and corporate control, and making sure there are safeguards that do not lead to more institutional theft of indigenous knowledge about seeds, medicinal plants, but also indigenous knowledge of climate dynamics, etc. And finally, as part of this approach to democratizing and decolonizing public research, I think there has to be an emphasis now on reclaiming universities as a commons and as pluriversities. the kind of pluriversities in which Francisco is working. So yes to intercultural dialogue, but thinking very carefully about how it's deployed, how it's used in these different pathways to research, innovation. They can be located in an expansion of grassroots innovation and self-managed research by and for Indigenous peoples, but they can also be deployed as part of a process that democratize and decolonize public research. So I just wanted to put the idea of intercultural dialogue in that wider context. Is essentially how can Indigenous peoples of all kinds, of all genders, have greater control over research, its priorities, the knowledge that's validated. And we know that, knowledge is power, and the kind of research that is coming very harmful. We heard from Francisco how harmful the formal knowledge is in terms of buttressing, amplifying industrial food and farming based on uniformity and the introduction of many toxic substances in the environment that are harming people and the planet. So how can that be reversed? And contesting knowledge, reclaiming control over knowledge, put in other values in line with cosmovisions of the diversity of Indigenous communities is very, very important. And that suggests that the whole process of knowledge creation needs to be much more decentralized, distributed, and democratized in order to enable that polycentricity in innovation and the remaking of diversity in the ecological, the economic, the cultural, and realms. So with that, I stop. Thank you. I've probably exceeded my 5 minutes. I apologize, Alicia.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Michelle, for
Michelle.
those very insightful. I now call upon Dr. Drupad Chowdhury, who is the key advisor of NESFAS on Indigenous Peoples' food systems. We all very much value his knowledge and experience, especially as he tells us that his knowledge comes not only from his Oxford University degree, but more importantly, from the knowledge, value, and wisdom of the Indigenous peoples of Northeast India. Dr. Drupad, sir, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Alethea. Let me build on, first of all, Francisco, thank you for, framing that, giving us that frame, the conceptual framework. It's really, really helpful. I would like to add on what you have said and also pick up on something that Michelle had just mentioned. The first is when we look at indigenous food systems, I think we also need to recognize what distinguishes the indigenous people's food systems from conventional knowledge systems or food systems. And it's basically grounded on the differences between what is experiential and what is experimental. When we look at indigenous or conventional food systems, this is based on experimental science or learning or knowledge. Whereas for the indigenous food systems, it is experiential. When you look at indigenous food systems and the knowledge systems, surrounding those or linked with that, these are knowledge which are passed on through generations of empirical experience. I always emphasize the fact that for farmers or for indigenous people, rural folks who are there, they do not have the luxury of failures. So whatever they pick up, whatever knowledge is, passed on through generations, are knowledge of practices or approaches which have worked. In the scientific community, we can very well, effort a failure, experience fail, it's adding to our knowledge, but it doesn't affect us individually in terms of, becoming a threat to our food security or to food availability. For the farmer who are practicing that, if they fail, it could very well mean starvation for their family. And therefore, they will pick up or use that knowledge which works. So, this is one important distinction between conventional food systems and the indigenous people's food system. The second is the importance which is laid on diversity. Francisco pointed out the diverse systems or subsystems, if you want to call it, within the Yucatan Maya food systems. So you have home gardens, you've got the milpa, you've got the forest, you've got different systems in there. This diversity, and mind you, within each one of them, you have the diversity of crops or bioresources, which goes or ranges between not only the difference or the different diversity between crops, but also within crops. So it's a huge diversity that you're talking about. This diversity is maintained for a very simple reason. For the indigenous farmer, this is a risk management strategy. Without that, they are vulnerable to all sorts of stress which could be there. And this could be in terms of climate in today's context, which is very important, but also to the market, to food availability. Linked to this diversity is another aspect. You find that among most of these indigenous food systems, the harvesting is sequential. In other words, you would harvest some food resource throughout the year. Harvesting, unlike in conventional agricultural systems, is not done at the end of the season or at one time. It's throughout the years that food or food resources are available, and this has implications in terms of nutritional security, in terms of food availability for the household and for the community. Now, these are two very important aspects that we need to keep in mind when we are thinking about what does indigenous food systems offer to us in today's world, and in terms of the co-creation of not just knowledge, but of solutions that Frank was referring to in his introductory remarks. I think when we look into the practices, there are many practices which have relevance in terms of the solutions which can come about that we are looking for. And I would just point out the urgency of finding these solutions. And in that urgency is what do food systems or indigenous people's food systems have to offer? I take one example in terms of participatory technology development. When we talk about breeding stress-tolerant crops, in the conventional system, there is a certain sequence in which you come up with a new crop variety. And that takes ages. It takes many years before you can come up with a final product. It also requires a lot of financial investment. But if we have a co-creation and build on the knowledge that indigenous people or rural farmers have, what you would see is you can cut down on the time which is required for coming up or building these stress-tolerant crops. Similarly, we can look at many others. Pest management, for example. There are approaches and practices in the indigenous food systems where diversity is central to pest management. Now, diversity becomes important because it becomes difficult for the pest or the insect to find the host plants when you have diverse crops being grown in a unit area rather than a monoculture, which is the characteristic of modern agriculture. Now, these are just two examples that I'm pointing out, and just to indicate what indigenous peoples' food systems and their practices can offer to the modern world in terms of developing templates of solutions for addressing the triple crisis that the planet faces today. I think, to me, when I look at the urgency of finding solutions and coming up with packages of practices for what we term, which has become a very popular sort of description of agriculture today, of looking at climate resilient agricultural practices, we look around and you don't really have something that you can, find a tangible answer to. However, when you look at indigenous food systems, you find that there are many practices which are there which can offer solutions, or at least provide the first building blocks of, of developing these solutions. I think one aspect where the earlier point that I made on diversity comes in is when you look at the crop diversity which is there in indigenous food systems, these are building blocks for tomorrow's stress tolerant crops. And these are sort of fundamental basic requirements if you're looking into climate resilience agriculture or the change that you want to bring about in broken systems, food systems today. So these are compelling reasons why we should have co-creation, bringing or building on the knowledge of indigenous peoples' practices and their knowledge systems. I think I'll stop here and, we can come back when we have the question and answers. Thank you, Alethea.
Thank you, Dr. Drupad, for sharing. One of our key partners of TIP are the Ojek peoples of Kenya, with whom Gracia and her team worked very closely to undertake the tape study. Dr. Edmund Deney is a well-known ethnobotanist who has worked in many parts of Africa and Asia, with special attention to hunting-gathering indigenous peoples communities. We are eager to hear from him, his practical suggestions on how we can take forward the concepts of Dr. Francisco. Dr. Edmund Deney, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Alethea, for giving me the floor. Thanks to Bafang for inviting me to intervene in this webinar. And I would like to thank my friend, Francisco. Wow, man, you delivered a very, very inspiring masterpiece. Thank you very much. I'm only going to concur to what Michelle and Rupert said before me, and I would like to further get the nail in the woods. Yes, as Francisco said at the very beginning of his speech, we are in trouble. And I think it's important to remind us that we are in trouble because of the fragility of biodiversity today, but it's important to keep in mind that biodiversity is not only biological diversity, but also includes cultural diversity. And these two types of diversity are equally endangered. Unfortunately, discourse related to the loss of biodiversity tends to focus on the endangered animal and plant species and to overlook the dangers affecting human cultures. So we're in trouble, but we need to keep faith in the future. And we need to do that. We need to transform if we want to transform this faith into reality, we need to have trust in the knowledge makers of tomorrow, which are the young generations. And by the young generation, and it is my first take-home message, and don't only include the youth, but it's also important to include the children, because the children are custodians of an important part of the knowledge, and they are also very key actors in the transmissions of knowledge horizontally among generational transmission of knowledge. And this is extremely important to preserve this horizontal circulation of knowledge among children and have them involved into the process of co-creation of knowledge. So as Francisco said, the question is about changing and not just transforming. We need to find different ways of knowing, and the co-construction of knowledge is more than the accumulation of different knowledge. It is really trying to create new way of producing science and to generate a new type of knowledge. We are all increasingly convinced by the new way of thinking science through co-creation of knowledge. But we must admit that it's easier said than done. And now we need to get our hands dirty to make this become real. And to do this, so there are many important obstacles that we need to overcome. The first one is that both indigenous knowledges and academic knowledge need to admit their respective limits, gaps, and caveats. That's a very first important step if we want to engage into co-creation of knowledge. Then the second important element is to assume respective subjectivity. And that is very difficult for what we call academic or mainstream science, which pretends to be universal and based on objectivity. And this academic science has some difficulty to recognize that it is built on values, visions, perceptions, history, and evolution. So that's another important challenge to address. The third important challenge to address is actually to challenging each other, to confront each other, and to have this confrontation being fruitful. We need to accept and respect disagreement, and that's a very important. Researchers among academic science are not all do not always agree, and that's the dialogue and the discussion that makes science go making progress. And so accepting this disagreement and respecting the other through this disagreement is extremely important. Lastly, to continue insisting on the fact that it's easier said than done, bridging academic science and indigenous sciences require three things. First, we need, of course, to remind that indigenous knowledge and skills are rooted in a very specific territory. And if we want this knowledge and science to express themselves, we need first and foremost to secure customary land access. That's an absolute preliminary step before engaging forwards. Second, we need to recognize that it is very difficult to upscale local expertise. And this expertise has a value at a very specific local level. The second element to consider is that the transmission of knowledge in indigenous societies through oral tradition sometimes processes without necessarily systematization. And that's a very challenging aspect that the academic science has to consider in order to build together production of knowledge and transmissions of processes as they are carried out among indigenous people. Another important point is that we need to consider the worldviews as a necessary contextualization of indigenous knowledge. We need to take into consideration cosmologies, ancestor cults, and other cultural aspects which are generally poorly considered by policymakers. And we have to emphasize on the importance of this aspect, of this dimension of worldviews. And lastly, globally speaking, indigenous knowledge and know-how are not sufficiently documented. And we also, for that, need to recast together with indigenous scientists to recast the way to study these extremely rich knowledge and to do it through the Nagoya Protocol and the access to benefit sharing. That was the last point I wanted to point out as a remark. And thank you for your attention. And over to you, Atelia.
Thank you, Dr. Dene, for that reflection. So moving on, we are very pleased that Dr. Marilyn Ngales, who is the Dean of the College of Arts and Science and the Program Director of the Indigenous Studies and Education of the Lyceum of the Philippines University, agreed to be with us. She belongs to the Indigenous Peoples of the Philippines, the IGARAT, and is a member of the Global Hub on Indigenous Peoples' Food Systems, just like Dr. Francisco and Dr. Edmund Dene. Madam Marilyn, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Althea. Okay, I'm opening the video. First of all, let me also thank Frank Roy for the invitation, the coordinator of TIP, and of course, Edmund, my colleague with the Hunter-Gatherer Education Association. Yes, I totally agree with the presentation, the concepts mentioned by Francisco for all the dedicated research he has done. And especially, I would like to focus on the two important aspects that he mentioned that has to do with the influence over how we learn more on food systems is the failure of the educational system and policy governance that do not match the thinking of the indigenous peoples because they have their own indigenous lens that have not been recognized at all. So in the Philippines, the weakest link actually, because I looked at the objectives of this webinar, that we should document, especially for the youth and children, document, understand, and pass these indigenous knowledge systems, and how in most cases, the university comes in. And the university is the weakest link at all. I can tell you that for the many years that I am with the university. And also the government has just mandated schools to include in their curriculum I'm looking at my time. Include in their curriculum the inclusion, the offering of indigenous knowledge, education to be part of the knowledge for offering in tertiary education. But this means that was only in 2019, but because of the pandemic, the implementation was delayed. Now, what does that mean? Are our faculty who are supposed to be there in the front line of education, are they prepared to even discuss this IFS that Francisco has discussed? And I am so happy because they are now listening to his lecture and it will be helpful for them to absorb. So also the many factors that affect the systems in the IP territories, the types of soil, which were already mentioned by my colleagues, Edmund, Michael, and Drupad. The many factors that we have to consider: the type of soil, the time spent, the seasons, and it made mention of my favorite subject, the shifting cultivators. Shifting cultivation has demonized the indigenous peoples as causing fire, and we lose the biodiversity because of this, but they're wrong. The cultivators have ways by which they are processing the remnants of the fire that have been flattened the lands. Now the problem is, this now goes into policy governance. The problem is our hunter-gatherers, once they have harvested their crops in a certain area, they leave that area to fallow, to regenerate itself. When they leave that area for regeneration for some 1 to 3 years, here comes the outsiders. They now possess the lands. That's why one deterrent to a good system is the intervention of this unwanted exploiters that already have to do with our land system. And it has been a slogan that land is life. If they lose the land, then you are letting the indigenous peoples die, because that's where they get all their food sustenance. It's like saying, if you kill those bees, you kill the pollinators. So sometimes the feeling that they can just get those bees from up on the tree out of curiosity, but they don't know the value why the bees are there. And so I'm glad the study has mentioned animals and insects. And for us who live in islands with aquatic animals, we would also like to look into how we value the many fish that are conserved. Like when lobsters are taken from the sea, our IPs, indigenous peoples, do not use any nets or spears. They get them with their own hands so as not to endanger the other species, and that's good. So co-creation, I like that. I have heard that from Francisco in October in Rome. And framework for environmental justice is really very important. And he did mention about spirituality, which is in most cases missing in other implementation of projects. So as we wind up, I would like to also mention how he differentiated food sufficiency from food security and food sovereignty. And we would like to advocate food sovereignty, because then the indigenous peoples would have control and conservation, because they do selective logging, they do selective conservation. It's not just massive removal of certain places in the mountains. And on the other hand, we are wanting to really have our own facilitators, our own faculty to become decolonized scholars as they now try to help the young people, informally or formal education, to work on continuing knowledge of their forebears, because their aspirations is to want to go back to the beginning where there is abundant life, there is abundant food, unlike now where we are so dissipated. Michael and Michelle and Edmund and Rupert had mentioned other ways, and I would like to just stick to what we are doing right now in terms of articulating this IP food systems. We are not capacitating the IPs. We have to educate the other side. It is the other side that needs education. They are the ones who decide, and this time they have to include the IPs in the participation of decision making, and the many needs that they would get. Well, it's not easy for capacitating, but they have to claim what they deserve from government, because it is the money of the whole Filipinos that are being spent, and we advocate that we get the allocation so that we can do more for the capacitation of those concerned. So my take home here is educate the other side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insightful feedback. We are very happy that Dr. Tadesse Wold, a pastoralist from Ethiopia and an anthropologist who is closely associated with Oxford University and a member of EPAF, board of EFAT, is also with us to give us practical suggestions on the concepts of Dr. Francisco. Dr. Tadesse, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. I was really very impressed by Francisco's presentation. As he talked through his slides, I was taking a walk through my own community, saying, is ours like this, like that, like this? So I was making tick marks. And thank you, Francisco, and the subsequent commenters who suggested very original ideas to what he had presented. I will not repeat what my friends have said. I would not repeat what Francisco has said, but I have 2 points to raise. And these include, indigenous life is not as rosy as it may appear when we draw it on paper. The tenure situation is bad in many places, land tenure especially. It looks like governments in some places are silently raiding indigenous landscapes. So indigenous people are intimidated. They cannot practice their agriculture simply because departments of agriculture, I think, have appropriated the practice and guide everybody, almost hold by the hands of indigenous people to plant kinds of seeds they do not know, they've never experienced, and to grow them using fertilizers and hybrid seeds. So this is very frightening. And it's more than just domination and, getting absolute obedience. And it's bringing the breaking, actually fastening and facilitating the breaking fast of the food systems in much of the places I'm familiar with. Our seeds of barley, wheat, and other highland crops are no more as they used to be. So the business people living away from the main roads where government officials can reach do better because they are less under control of the state. So this is not only land and crops that are being appropriated, it's also the culture of the communities. Celebrations, major celebrations are appropriated. So they are now celebrated in government premises rather than in the sacred places of communities, in the different villages of indigenous people, where in a specific group, I know, for example. So it's not as easy. Pastures have been appropriated, extensive rangelands where sheep and cows are raised and where secondary homes are built to keep, manure, have been silently appropriated for people to plow them. So what they do is they allow one section of the population to plow the land which has never been plowed in the past. And now that is facilitating and actually facilitating erosion of the mountain growth. And there's a decline of livestock production and so on. So I think future research, probably Francisco and this group can focus on these major issues that are confronting the lives of indigenous people. So what space is there free to practice cultivation in ways autonomous as it has been practiced in the past? I don't know. There isn't much space. Where I come from, our pastures have been divided. Farmers, agropastoralists were scared to leave them as pastures because they were seeing government officials and district officials stealing land. Practically stealing is a better term, but not very polite. So the best solution for them was to divide their pastures and use them as plots to keep the state away, to keep officials away from their land. So this is also has negative effects on food production, sustainable or not. And I tell you one case when I and my wife were writing a book on the insect crop. This is the false banana tree. That's a major crop in southern Ethiopia. But the story we wrote at the beginning of our book, as we wrote the book, and what happened immediately after we'd finished the draft was dramatic. Some, as you know, rural plots of indigenous people cannot be plowed by a single person. They have different plots for different crops. So they have a kind of, not cooperative, but work groups that work, on the land of different people at different times. So these were now not officially banned, but there people do not practice that out of fear. So there is the influence of also some Christian churches in helping these things to be the normal rather than abnormal. So they're telling farmers not to eat root crops like molds. So indigenous farmers are really, they're abused verbally. They let, church songs to insult them. Elders are abused. Sacred places are desanctified. And I don't know. I wish I could see the place where there is law and order, where the right of indigenous people really respected, where people can practice their agriculture, sing their songs, and have their elders decide on the kinds of rules they want to be under. But in some places, this is not the case. So I think focusing on the practices and exchange practices and also consumption patterns inside groups and between groups, this is also another area that needs attention. So I was listening carefully about the intercultural. When one culture cannot defend itself, then the intercultural would be only to look for solutions about how should we solve this together. We are perishing under this situation. So is there any way we can save our systems and ourselves? But this is difficult to believe what I'm saying. If you speak against it, you will be a terrorist. If you don't speak about it, you're accepting what's happening. So some of us find it absolutely difficult to be observers of what's going on. And I think it needs the support of every indigenous group, scholars and others, to focus on these kind of territories where life of indigenous peoples are in real difficulty. So imagine where a Department of Agriculture takes full control of your agricultural system, your cultivation, your spiritual practices prior to cultivation and during harvest. So in that circumstance, you are nobody. So the creators, the doers, they appropriate your whole being, they appropriate the whole process. And they actually, when you do the job, but they take the credit and they report what has been happening as a very progressive and very productive exercise. I think I should end my comment by this. I did not say really much about Francisco's and others because everything looked like a fairy tale to me. I know the practice is like that, but it used to be like that. I know my own community when we practiced agriculture in that way, but it has crumbled or is not just under threat, but is fully controlled now by state agents, agricultural extension workers, and cadres. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tadesse, for sharing. So, with that, we have heard the words of wisdom from our elders, and I now request Dr. Francisco to give his response to the suggestions that he just heard. Dr. Francisco, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Alicia, and really thank you to the comments from all of you. Very insightful, and I already made a note in my presentation. I missed this part, so it should be there. And I agree with everything you have said. I would like to make two comments only. Yeah, one of you said knowledge is power. Yes, it is. So is ignorance, and we have this situation to deal with. And the other one is another reason I don't use the term transformation quite often, unless it helps to communicate the meaning behind it with other people. It's because indigenous food systems, with the influence of Green Revolution uh, um, elements, are being transformed as well, but not on the direction that we would like to see. So transformation has that other part that also along to what Michelle mentioned. And I already comment in the chat. I want to thank every one of your comments and thank for all of you attending this webinar. I really hope that, as I did, enjoyed the comments from the commentators. Thank you very much. Back to you, Alicia.
Thank you, Dr. Francisco. So we have heard from our keynote speakers and suggestions from our panel of elders. Now we would like to hear from representatives of our partner organizations. And in that regard, may I kindly request the representatives from NESFAS, OPDP, EPAF, PASD, and Lannis Life to please use the raised hand feature on this webinar so that you can be unmuted. I have already been informed of some of the individuals who will be speaking, and then I will kindly request that each speaker limit their remarks to 3 minutes. I now call upon Pinyar Karshiing, a representative of NESFAS, the organization to which I belong. Pinyar, you have 3 minutes, and I request Tanko to also unmute Pinyar.
Hello.
Yes, Pinyar, please speak.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Something is wrong with my video.
It's okay, you can proceed.
Okay, so greetings to everyone present here. My name is Pinyar Bor Kharshiye, and I come from Northeast India. I hold a master degree and I recently joined NESFAS. In the last 1 year or so, I have had the opportunity to learn how indigenous communities across Meghalaya continue to practice and protect their traditional knowledge and value systems, from conserving indigenous seeds to safeguarding agrobiodiversity and to promoting new ideas such as supporting school meals with inclusions of wild edibles collected from the landscapes of villages. This webinar has made me realize that we must learn to interculturally combine traditional experience and modern knowledge for the well-being of all. As a young professional, I would like to get some more practical suggestions as onto how to make this co-creation happen. So I therefore request TIP and our presenters to organize more training and exposure visits or sessions so that we can become more effective co-creation facilitators in the field. In NESFAS, we strongly believe that our indigenous people's food system, if strengthened, will enhance our biodiversity and improve nutrition, rural livelihoods, and climate resilience for the well-being of all. What inspires me most is NESFA's approach to agroecology in practice, which promotes community-led solutions that integrate ancestral wisdom with contemporary knowledge. In line with this vision, NESFAS is going to establish a training center here in Meghalaya This initiative will serve a platform for young people from both rural and urban areas to reconnect with nature, learn from elders, and actively participate in preserving the knowledge system passed down through generations. It represents a unique opportunity to equip youth with the understanding and skills required to protect our environment, our food systems, and our indigenous people's heritage. As young people, we would like to see many of our speakers and those present today to come and help us to build a unique intercultural training center, as Dr. Francesco has suggested. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Pinyar. I now call upon the representative of OPDP, Ms. Dorothy Cheruto. You have 3 minutes, Dorothy.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and thank you for having me here. So today I would like to share stories from Ogiek elders about traditional food system, which some of the stories we collected last year during our storytelling sessions. And most of these stories shows how Ogiek lived in harmony with nature, and they also protected biodiversity. So I will quickly share 5, but in a very brief way, some of the captivating stories that we collected from our elders that needs to be passed to the younger generation. So the first story I still remember is when we sat with an elder who lived just adjacent to the forest in East Mau. And as we were seated, I remember we could hear the sounds of bird, and he was telling us about the importance of these birds. And it was, I remember he was saying it is a sound of our food growing. So he told us something simple, but again, it was very powerful. That as Ogiek, we used to depend so much on wild fruits and vegetables. And birds were their farmers. This is because birds pollinated the plants. As they flew, they dropped seeds. And just like that, fruits and vegetables grew everywhere without anyone planting them. And from this story, we could see there was culture and food traditions. There was diversity and even co-creations. So birds are key to Ogiek food security. And another elder also shared how visits between family included gifting seeds, fruits, or vegetables. And to Ogiek, you could not just visit somebody empty-handed. So you had to carry food and leave behind as a blessing. So to Ogiek, food was not just eaten, it was shared, spread, and even gifted. So hosts would receive seeds that were later planted or spread in their farm, and even throwing seeds around the homestead after sweeping helped new plants to grow. So from this story, we could capture that there was co-creation and sharing of knowledge, there was diversity, and even human and social values. And then another elder also talked about honey. Of course, honey is part of Ogiek diet. So it is still food. It was food then and it is still food. It was medicine and it is still medicine. It was part of every ceremony and celebration. So when a baby was born, honey was there. When people are sick, honey was there to heal people. So with this, honey connects food, health, and even culture, and showing the richness of Ogiek food system. So from this story from an elder, we also learned about culture and tradition, responsible governance, and diversity. And lastly, and final one is one elder said something about hunting with respect. And hunting was part of food system, and it was done in a very respectful way. It was a sin to kill female animal or a young one. They only took what was needed at that time. So hunting wasn't about greed, it was about balance. And this respect means animals thrived and even meat was always available. So the moral of this story is even in taking, Ogiek gave back to ensure there was balance in nature. And we could see this also in terms of responsible governance and culture and traditions. So all these 5 stories teaches us that indigenous food system, like those of Ogiek, are built on knowledge, respect, and coexistence with nature. And by protecting the forest, it also means protecting wisdom, our biodiversity, and our future. So as we talk about food system and sustainability, we should also remember the answers may already live in the stories of our elders. So thank you so much. Those are the 5 stories that I could vividly remember while we were collecting stories in the year 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. We are also very pleased that EPAF is here with us today, and I call upon Mr. Amen Befeteri, representative of EPAF, to give his feedback for 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm really deeply honored to this webinar. I'll start by saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. My name is Amen, and I'm deeply honored to be in this webinar. I'm really inspired and motivated to join this movement as I am a young generation person in this world, and my connection to indigenous knowledge is profound, as I am the son of the renowned photographer Tariq Safa, who is my father. He's just not a great artist, but he's a dedicated advocate of the indigenous knowledge system of the Gamo society, having led the organization behind the Thousand Star Festival, which is the incredible annual event in Arbaminch, where I'm really based on here. The presentation from our elders make me feel that the youngsters and young energy would be the most powerful thing that could help this movement or this project. So it would be a great honor to join and be part of this movement. My question would be at home, what if it is possible to have youngsters and people who are recently graduated in different departments to empower this movement? Like I am recently graduated from the information technology from the university called Arbam University, where I live currently. So my question is, for my advice would be, if youngsters or recently graduates would have invested their power and knowledge in this kind of movement, it would be helpful and it would have revolutionary change on this kind of processes in order to help and having more energy to the indigenous food part. So I've been in the Gamo Highlands, specifically in Chencha area recently, as a filmmaker for the Terrain Indigenous Development Action. We were filming some activities on this part. So I have the chance to see everything in person, the project activities and documenting the remarkable good ways of the Gamo people. I've personally experienced and tested the resilient food system, including the sample fermented insect or the forms of banana bread culture. This experience combined with the lifelong immersion in this culture have solidified my purpose. I've now joined the IDA or the Integrated Development Action as a member, fully committed to be an advocate. So I've learned we need to conserve and work deeply on these movements as a youngster or as a youth. So it will be helpful for the elders elders and everyone to have more of our age or young people concentrated in this project. And this is my thoughts of this. Maybe I'm having a little bit less weak connections on my Wi-Fi. If you have listened to me, this is all I had to say. Thank you all.
Thank you, Amin. We couldn't get so much of it, but we will definitely get in touch with you very soon and we can have further discussion regarding that. So thank you all for your contribution and insightful feedback. We have now come to the end, and for me, it has been very exciting because it was my first experience to moderate an international webinar. I am grateful to TIP for giving me this opportunity. I will leave this meeting with a sense that as young people, if given the opportunity and the training, we can be important change makers for the future we want as Indigenous peoples. I want to thank all the speakers for sticking to the time schedule. I also thank all of you who registered and attended this webinar. It is very encouraging that we had an audience of about 100 participants for a webinar that was called by Indigenous peoples themselves, and that is being led by elders whom we know have a deep commitment to our cause. I now call upon Baprang to summarize the key takeaways of the webinar and to close the webinar. Baprang, please.
Thank you very much, Alithia. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Francisco, Rupert, Michelle, Edwin, Marilyn, and Teresa for their contribution. And I would also like to thank for the representatives of more than 12 organizations, including the CGIAR Group, UNESCO, C4, ECRAF, the Coalition for Indigenous Peoples Food System, the Global Hub for Indigenous Food System, Land is Life, IIAD, EPAF, and others. And for the several young people who are interested, we are very keen to get your support and to work with you. So please do feel free to be a part and a parcel of our work. I think Francisco started with a very important statement, and that is that we are in trouble. And this was supported also by Edmund when he said that in looking at this, the trouble is not just the biodiversity, but also the biocultural aspects. And Michel Pemberg took that point further and says that the transformation that we require is a transformation away from the colonization, from the patriarchy, and for the lack of empowerment of communities. I think this for me was an extremely important point to remember. And to remember, too, another point that Dr. Francisco mentioned is that his communities have 4,000 years of accumulated knowledge and experience on food systems. And that then when you compare with science and you build bridges, some of the knowledge blocks that we are thinking of synthesis, analysis methods, and concepts are also very much part of what indigenous people themselves gave. And he gave the example of soil management, where there are very sophisticated systems that have been followed by indigenous people that show that they have a knowledge that is deep and that is a dynamic, as he put it, equilibrium in all that we have trying to do. But the basis of that work is this, what he highlighted was the spirit of working together. And then he highlighted the point, which is a very important when comparing the arrangement of the 10 principles of agroecology, where in the normal FAO method, the economic value and the responsible governments seems to be the bedrock, whereas for indigenous peoples, it was the social values, it was the governance, it was the circularity that were the main tripod that held together, including the spirituality and the biocentric aspects, which Marilyn and others had also highlighted. He also mentioned a very important point for us to take home, and that is when we look at our food system and compare with with what Teresa said of a new system that is being imposed upon us. Uh, they speak of competition. We speak of cooperation and coexistence. They speak of value chain. We speak of value web. They speak of supply chain. We speak of supply web. And they speak about the food system, which combines food security, food self-sufficiency, and food sovereignty. And Michelle reminded us a very important point too, that in the co-creation of knowledge that we aspire and we work, TIP and other organizations, we have to take into account the importance of cognitive rights, the rights of all to exist, the right to follow and do what is important, and the right to your lands and your territories. And he highlighted the point that we are here to celebrate humanity, and that is the fundamental step towards the intercultural knowledge system. And therefore, in the process that we do, it's important when you look at science as an important member to see that first and foremost, to value that humanity, we have to decolonize it and create what he called the professional reversals so that we can protect the research also from the thefts that take place from the corporate sector that we see too often. Drupal highlighted the importance of experiential and experimental aspects and building templates or solutions that can offer a hope for people. Edmund highlighted the point that your target group are not just youth, but don't forget children, because they are very important aspect, and that it is very, very important for us to accept, to respect, even as we disagree, and that these are the aspects that we need to take into account, including the cosmologies and the cultural aspects that are so important, and to remember that there are international actions that have been taken, such as the Nagoya Principle. Marilyn highlighted that one of our big limitations is the failure of education and policy matters in making in taking an understanding of indigenous peoples. And Teresa highlighted the point that land tenure is extremely important. As our cultures and our lands are being appropriated, it's important as indigenous peoples, as organizations that work for indigenous people, that we stand up and we fight, because without our land and territories, without the knowledge that sustains them, and the points that Francisco had raised in the 10 agroecology, we may not have them for a very long time. It was nice to hear the comment of young people from NESFAS and also from Dorothy OBDP. We didn't hear too much, unfortunately, from EPAF, but as Alithia mentioned, we will look and take care of that through an email. But definitely, this has been a very, very useful meeting for us. A very good feedback from our learned friends, but also from all who took part. And I was glad and happy to see some of my old friends, Gary Martin and others, who are there. And I hope that we will continue not only to upscale, but rather to outscale the work we do amongst those of us who are believers that indigenous food system can lead to a better world for all. Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to close by saying thank you to Alithia. You've done a great job as a young person for leading, and this is a sign that young people, if given an opportunity, can lead and for us to follow. Thank you so much for everything. And bye-bye to all of you.
With that, we come to the end of this webinar. Thank you, everyone. We will definitely stay in touch.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Great to see you all.
Cheers.
See you in Rome, Raymond.
Thank you, everyone.
Madly.
And
Bye.
Aditya, please take care of the recording.
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Bye bye.